Hi, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from, and welcome to this new episode of the Rise Up Radio. And today on the show, we have Lori Adams Brown with us. Lori, welcome to the Rise Up Radio. It's great to have you with us today.
Oh, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for asking me to be on the show.
Our pleasure. So, folks, a quick introduction about Laurie, and she's going to talk a little bit more about herself. But she brings over 2 decades of work experience in the talent management and development space across multiple continents. And we're going to hear more about the multiple continents bit for sure. And she's currently the director of global talent development at Hive Solutions, and she's been at the forefront of building talent programs for organizations through and through. And she's also dedicated, a bunch of her life and effort into disaster relief during the Indonesian tsunami, and also supports nonprofits. So, Laurie, welcome again, and would love to hear a little bit about your journey. And would you like to take us, our audience, through, your work a little bit?
Sure. And hi, everyone, wherever you're listening. I spent the early part of my career straight out of grad school here in the Bay Area, where I once returned to after 20 years of working and living in Southeast Asia. I started off in the nonprofit space, but I worked originally in the country of Indonesia, which is a beautiful country where I got to learn and grow a lot early on in my career. Like I said, straight out of grad school, I worked with a nonprofit where I was working alongside the Ministry of Education in Indonesia, working on some training the trainer programs. It was just an incredible experience. And then I was in a community development nonprofit when that big tsunami hit about 20 years ago in Indonesia. I was working in that area, which was a civil war zone. And once again, very rewarding and meaningful work. I made some incredible relationships there, and I learned quite a bit through that experience of, I would say it really formed my leadership, working as a liaison with the UN efforts during that time, really seeing people from around the world come together and try to help this place that had been so devastated by a natural event that was not anything anyone ever should go through. But in that experience, although it was the most probably difficult part of my career, it was also the most rewarding because I got to see people with all these different cultures and languages. And it reminded me of my upbringing in international school in Venezuela and in Costa Rica, where I had friends and teachers from all over the world, and we all got to come together and learn together. And so there was something really beautiful about that experience, although it still is a very heartbreaking thing that I carry with me and the memories of those that we lost in that event. Which, I think that sometimes leadership gets formed in these difficult moments. Those are the parts that really you either step up to the leadership opportunity, or you find another way, and that's okay. Sometimes
Yeah.
that's a little too much for people to handle, and I completely understand. International disaster relief is also an area where I learned some skills that I've brought into the work that I do now. I ended up working in Singapore after that, and then I moved here to Silicon Valley just before the COVID pandemic, and have been working here ever since. And I think some of those lessons I learned in disaster relief have helped me to understand what it means to build resilience, to cultivate that in our teams, to understand that well-being really matters. We're human, and it's really allowed me to form sort of this very human-centered leadership approach in this current era of AI. So, yeah, that's me.
And folks, that's exactly what we're going to discuss with Laurie today, the human factor in the AI era, right? Laurie, so, there's a lot of chatter about AI and how it's going to replace jobs. And while we don't know what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, but we surely know that, the shape of the future of work or shape of the organizations is purely changing, right? The future of work will be very different from what it is today. And while most conversations are revolving around AI and tech, there's very little conversation about humans, right? And there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of skepticism about losing jobs, redundancy. Although there might be some productivity gains initially, and then there might be some redundancies as we go on, right? I think your perspectives on the emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence is what we are looking to explore today. So let's dive into it straight away. Uh, at the heart of every organization, and when we talk of emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence, we talk about managers, people who lead other individuals in organizations and are supposed to get things done. How do you see the role of managers evolving in this new era? All right. What is your take on it?
Well, I do have a special place in my heart for managers, I will say. I get to work with some incredible managers on a daily basis in the work I do here in a Silicon Valley-based tech manufacturing company. And I get to go to our different sites around the world and spend time with our managers and our executives as well, and have rolled out this key leadership development um, program that's in multiple languages now as well. And having spent a good chunk of my own career as a manager, I understand that managers' expectations have changed over time, especially in this era of AI. And
Yep.
so I really wholeheartedly believe, and I also have spent a lot of time listening to other colleagues of mine here in Silicon Valley, as well as networking with many other people in the talent development space. I spend time with founders, CEOs, CHROs here in Silicon Valley, and also stay connected with many of the ones I've known since I worked in Singapore. And what I'm seeing from the data and the predictions about the future of work is really the emphasis needs to be on these EQ and CQ skills. So that means emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, and technical skills are going to continue to be important. We work to upskill those, but not at the neglect of these very important, what some people would refer to as quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes if you're not, if you're just listening instead of watching, soft skills. I'm not a
Yep.
huge fan of referring to it as soft skills. Somehow it implies that it's not hard. But I
Yep.
find that, especially in my key leadership program, one of the hardest courses is the foundational course, which is listening to understand. And I think that I'm still a work in progress with that. So, learning to have empathy in a time that is very busy for managers. We're seeing some large companies that have done some layoffs over the last year and even two
Yep.
years where managers are being expected to do more than before. So we are seeing, manager has to become this facilitator of work across human and digital workers. And we are expecting managers to learn to partner with AI because it is going to help with productivity and it already is.
Yep.
And I'm really hoping that, managers can embrace coaching for their growth, to enable them to help increase that employee engagement, which we do expect managers to play a role in. We expect managers to be the formers of culture in partnership with HR,
Yep.
but it really is a role everybody has. And so I think that overall, I would say if anybody's experiencing that fear that AI is going to take over your job, I just want to say that fear is a normal fear to have.
Yep.
But what I see from what I read and the experts that I know, it really is just transforming our work
Mhm.
as opposed to taking jobs. There are jobs that AI will completely do, but
Yep.
I am really working hard, and many of us are, to upskill you as managers out there to help you know what it looks like in the future as best as we can predict. And I think it's an exciting time to be in talent development. I really love the emphasis that we're able to bring, which is a very human-centered approach.
Awesome. So, Laurie, you did mention about EQ and CQ and the human-centered approach, and you also mentioned that, your past experience has a lot to do with it, right? Obviously, you've led in crisis, and then you've also led in the corporate boardrooms, right? How has your experience, in the past in Indonesia during the crisis time, and your corporate experience later, shaped your view around leadership, and how would these lessons show up in your work today? Give us some examples.
Yeah, well, it might be hard for some people to understand how something like international disaster relief, tsunami, earthquake work could relate it all to Silicon Valley boardrooms and executive teams. But my personal experiences, there's so much I learned in that time that I bring into the role that I have today. And I think that what that looks like is, if you're reading a job description for your average tech company here in Silicon Valley, and, people like me have been the ones to write those now in partnership with AI,
Yeah,
you'll often see a phrase that says rapidly changing environments.
great.
I've never worked in a more rapidly changing environment than tsunami relief.
That's great.
It was, and it was risky. Risk was a constant conversation. So we were saving actual lives, getting people food and water, locating the bodies of their loved ones. It was intense and traumatic. And although I did get a trauma informed certification to help me work through that, that is also something that applies now to my work being trauma informed is something I see as a skill that I hope managers will embrace going forward in your career in the future of work, because there are so many things we've learned, even just since the COVID pandemic, about how the rapidly changing environment is within our corporations, but it's
Yeah.
also in our societies at large.
Right.
And so, for example, I'm sitting here in the United States, and even just as we're recording this, there are riots going on south of me in LA. I'm in Northern California, and that's happening in Southern California. But many of us are constantly checking the news because we have loved ones there. We're concerned about our immigrant friends. People are dealing with anxiety coming to work. So there is a rapidly changing environment in our world today, but also in our companies. We have return to office mandates that might be changing here and there. So much change, and that's really not great for humans, and it's also not good for business. So that trauma informed certification that I got earlier in my career has really been something I use every day as I have conversations, as I have one-on-ones with my direct reports, as I speak with managers about the load they're carrying and the lives they're living. We're not just human beings in work, we're human beings outside of work as well. And so that is really important, I think. And other lessons that I learned were we worked in a certain way in disaster relief where it's not like anywhere else I've ever worked. We had protocols of 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off because you were
Okay.
doing 24-hour days.
Right.
24-hour days with earthquakes. We were all being traumatized as workers as well. And so obviously that's an extreme situation. But what I learned from that is we didn't expect people to have an ability to work 24 hours a day nonstop forever and ever for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And yet in Silicon Valley, I don't see a lot of times any best practices being discussed around what humans are actually capable of doing. It's just this constant push to work sometimes 6 and 7 days a week, 80-hour weeks. The research shows out of Stanford and other places, if you work more than 50 hours a week, your productivity goes way down.
So, yeah.
Like we have made so much technological advances with AI and other things, but humans are still humans. And so to protect our time and to help us work smarter, not harder, I think is really the role of a manager going
Mm.
forward to draw those boundaries and remind yourself that sleep is needed for you to concentrate on those emails, to make good decisions, to be agile in a rapidly changing environment. Some things are timeless, which is that we need our basic human needs. We need sleep, we need food, we need water, we need exercise. We probably need a little vitamin D with some sunshine. Moving around is important for our brains to concentrate. All of those things I brought from my time in the tsunami, that it's important to take time off, to get away, so you can do your best work in those especially rapidly changing environments where high stress happens.
Very eloquently put, Lori. Thank you for that. So you mentioned EQ and CQ are not soft skills, right? These are hard skills. These are kind of life skills, if I can say, right, in a professional environment. So how can managers go about building them, right? So would you like to share a bit about the programs that you're designing, right? How are you integrating, EQ and CQ inside the programs, and how are managers learning these skills on the job and practicing them on the job with the teams? Obviously making mistakes, but learning as well for sure.
Yes, making mistakes is okay. I don't expect people to be perfect because I'm not. And so that expectation seems too high and impossible. But we do, I guess we're kind of famously known in the tech world here in Silicon Valley as failing failing forward. And making mistakes is, I often tell my direct reports and other executives I work with, those can be teachers.
Yeah.
So, what are we learning from that? I recently interviewed Gary Ridge, the CEO. He's the former CEO of WD-40, and he's going to be a guest on my podcast soon, which is called A World of Difference. And I read his book, which is excellent. And he talks about learning moments.
Mm.
And so that's a good way to frame it. When you make a mistake, what are you learning from it? Let's take some time. Obviously, there's certain places where that sort of sandbox is a little easier to make mistakes in as opposed to when it's higher stakes. And so
Yeah.
Dr. Amy Edmondson, who's out of Harvard and is really sort of the primary, I would say, subject matter expert at this point on psychological safety, which is something I talk about a lot too. She says, I've recently heard her speak about the areas where risk is more welcome and easier to take. So
Mhm.
that can confuse people. Like, really, we don't want you to, the failing forward approach shouldn't apply when it's life or death. So doctors shouldn't be failing forward. Surgeons, we need them to like really do
Correct.
everything right. And so I think it's important to know where mistakes are easier and more welcome to make. And I think that is in this area of innovation where we're learning and inventing and trying to find that new best thing. And incidentally, WD-40 is named 40 because the first 39 tries were mistakes that they learned from. And then number 40 was the formula that worked that's now world famous. Um, but all that to say, excuse me, I think that rethinking the skills and competencies of people managers is where we're at in talent development. So we're trying to upskill the workforce. We're trying to, I'm raising three in the Gen Z generation, and one's in college, and a couple are in high school. And they are hearing in their Gen Z world that AI is taking over the jobs for Gen Z. These entry level jobs don't exist anymore, and people don't want to hire Gen Z. And so I think what we're seeing is some of that upskilling is starting earlier in our context here in the United States, that we're needing to sort of partner even with academic institutions to help prepare some of these students as they come in. But at the
Right.
same time, I'm on the side of helping prepare managers. How do we welcome in Gen Z who are brilliant and talented and digital natives and they work
Yep.
very differently? So instead of, boomers and Gen Xers and millennials being pitted against Gen Z and then Gen Alpha, which is coming soon, to say, well, do you remember we used to always have to work this way? I don't know how it was for you when you came into your career, but I remember those things being said about my generation.
Right.
You need to adapt. And so I think that some of that is normal and happens in every generation. But I think we have opportunities now to really bridge that gap sooner and help managers with these EQ skills to listen to Gen Z and understand where they're coming from, to be able to gain that brilliance on the team because they do bring an advantage. I think redesigning jobs with the needs of the organization in mind, knowing that AI is really, in particular, helping white collar jobs be more productive, but
Right.
also being understanding that some of these blue collar jobs are probably going to remain, a little more similar as to what they were before in a lot of cases. So reinventing learning with these considerations, like I said, my key leadership program that I developed when I came into this role, about 2.5 years ago, I got our Glint survey data, and my insights from what was very clear in that data, as well as meeting with hundreds of people one on one to get their anecdotal information, it really matched up for me to unveil this key leadership program that I developed around communication, cross-cultural communication being
Yep.
embedded in that, but also EQ skills within it. So we also do a program, a course where I help teach people a feedback method. Some people just need a model on how to do feedback well, and it's very straightforward. So I have people practice it with each other. I also have a course, which I'll be actually delivering here as well pretty soon again. And it's called Direction Alignment Commitment. And people spend time really digging into their team. Where
Okay.
is the area of opportunity for them? And they
Mm.
come away with their own action plan of how to address the biggest opportunity, whether it's direction, alignment, or commitment that their team is facing. So just getting really, into the practicalities of how they're
Mhm.
working to position them with the skills that are going to be needed increasingly going forward with partnering with AI. So we also, in talent development, if you've ever been in a company and you've been in any kind of learning and development program, you may also realize that participation, especially in rapidly changing environments and high-paced work cultures, can be a little bit tricky. So I partnered with our marketing team, which are amazing, to incentivize our participation. So they designed, because it's the key leadership program and all of our branding is keys, and each of our courses has a little acronym for the key.
Okay.
And we have lanyards with little keys that you can put the
Yeah.
keys on for each course you've been to. So it
Nice.
allows people in the office to know who's been to which
Yeah,
program.
that's
So it gives
physical
a little bit
gamification,
of FOMO.
right?
Yeah.
Correct.
So that's kind of fun. I do think that,
True.
there are other ways also to incentivize that we're working on, but I do realize that part of it is people want to belong, and that's a human need.
Correct.
And we can be a part of cultivating that within the office. So really, I think a very popular thing that I've brought into the company is something called manager meetups. And just giving managers a chance to learn peer to peer from each other
Right.
globally on a
Right.
call, and we address a particular topic. They break up into groups and they talk with each other. I
Nice.
think some of the best learning comes from each other because
From
we're the ones
peers.
doing the work.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Right. Right. Awesome. So, Laurie, with all these, changes happening in the workplace, with generations coming in, right? New generations coming in, and especially with future of work, with roles changing, right? Talent development, as a practice needs to evolve, right? The way we are setting goals, the way we are measuring performance, the way we are talking about engagement and experience and even learning to a large extent. Uh, in my opinion, it has to change drastically. I don't know what's your opinion. And if it is to change, then what would that new age look like, right? If I were to give you a crystal ball, what would you predict?
Well, we get this question quite a bit in talent development. How do you think it's going to look? And all of us are just predicting based on the data that we have, based on the direction we see things going with some of the founders in AI, some of them that I know personally, and I know where they're going.
Hmm.
No one can predict exactly what will happen, but there is quite a bit of competition right now with these new startups around the talent development space and even talent acquisition, of course, too, where I get to meet with these different founders and figure out what it is they're bringing to the table and what they're solving.
Hmm.
So there's a lot that will be used by AI to continue to develop and upskill workforces into the future. And
Hmm.
I guess some of what that is, largely looking like is that we're doing more, excuse me, we're doing more individual approaches. I think that we can do a better job going forward of tailoring a learning experience for each
You mean
employee.
personalization, right? I mean, moving towards hyper personalization.
Personalization.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yes. And so, you know, from the way leadership and organizations used to be structured, it was more centralized. We're seeing
Right.
more of a decentralization,
Right.
which causes some people, understandably, to panic because no one knows how that can look going forward. There's so many different things being discussed, and we don't need to get into all the details here, but there's some great books being written about it. If you need a recommendation, I've recently read this one. I guess shameless promotion for my
Yep.
friend,
Okay.
Deborah Perry Piscioni, and it's called Employment is Dead: How Disruptive Technologies Are Revolutionizing the Way We Work, and it's out of Harvard Business Review Press. But it's
So,
really along these lines. But there's a lot of great resources out there. But I think
yeah.
that really what's important to know without getting too into the weeds around this is that before we could expect a lot of leadership decisions from the top to just trickle down. And I know that there's a lot of cultural nuance around that, having worked in Asia and hierarchical
Yeah.
cultures are, very different. You look at Denmark, it's much more egalitarian than a place
Right.
like Japan or something. And so, all that to say, we're seeing these trends globally in different ways with a lot of nuance. But I think that when it comes to career development, it used to be more these career ladders where we saw people start here, individual contributor, and then they went to the bottom rung, which women still struggle with in the research because of the bias we have toward women and seeing men for their potential more and expecting women to have all the experience and do the job maybe 6 months before she gets it. So that's still there. But what we're seeing more is career pathways that might move laterally. And this is
Right.
also because of Gen Z's really philosophy around work as well as understanding how the future of work is more of this web instead of this ladder. And so that all that being said, when it comes to talent development, understanding that we will need to be helping individuals upskill in the direction they're going, which may not be an upward direction, it may be a lateral direction. Um, for various reasons. And so that is actually a really exciting, but can be overwhelming for some people. But I guess what I would say is that partnering with AI makes it exciting because it
Mm.
allows us to be more individual and really listen to understand the employee and what their desires are for their own career and
Yeah.
help them to develop the skills they want and they need to have the fulfilling career that they want and to do the best work of their lives in our companies. So that's a really exciting thing. You know, there is some need still, and I still see a space for in-person training because of
Yeah.
what we know about nervous
Right.
systems and
Right.
learners and learning
Right.
styles. But I think what we're going to see is a bit of a hybrid approach. And so more increasingly personalized AI coaching. I myself use a lot of that, and I know several people do, and mixed with virtual trainings and in-person trainings, and
Yeah.
a lot of adaptive learning, to
Yeah.
meet people's needs.
Absolutely. I think what you're saying, right? It's going to be a hybrid world, at least for coming years, where you have in-person learning as well as backed up by technology, which is more ongoing. So I think that is going to bring a very, very powerful solution in the learning space for sure. Now, talking of AI tools, you're definitely using a few yourself, and we did discuss. We are building one Risely, which is basically exactly bringing AI for leadership development and manager development. Uh, how do you see the cornerstone of these tools, right? What should they surely do? What should they could do potentially in the future more and more?
Yeah, obviously, it's hard to find any space right now where AI isn't being discussed, and so it's just massive. People are saying
Yep.
it's just absolutely revolutionizing everything, and so some of it we know, and once again, like I've mentioned before, some of it we don't know. But I think really that need for the continuous learning systems integrated into workflows. There's some really exciting startups and some incredible founders that are just brilliant that I've met here and had dinner with and discussed what they're creating. And it really is, helping even everything from documentation flow more
Yep.
easily. That's something I've brought into my team that I have direct reports working on, and then helping to evolve trainings out of those documentations for both onboarding and maybe even people who are being promoted internally or doing that web of switching roles laterally or however that goes. Recognizing there is this demand, like I mentioned, for personalization and learning. And so, I said, I've used multiple tools, but for the business side, I think we want to focus really on a lot of measurability. That we're
Mm.
seeing more trends in corporations to do performance reviews based on outcomes, both
Right.
for bias
Right.
elimination, because it can be
Right.
very subjective, especially for women who tend to get rated on our personality, which is something we fundamentally can't change.
Right.
And I think about 78%, I think it is, of women get rated negatively on their performance review, whereas it's only about 2% with men, which is a huge disparity.
Very, very
But
big
men
difference. Yeah.
tend to get rated on their outcomes, right?
Yeah.
And women tend to
Right.
get rated on their personality. So I think
Right.
leveling that playing field with learning and development, with talent development, with AI approaches is really helpful. So from the business side, yeah, and we, latest tech like AI, we want to use it to reach more people, to automate more of our tasks, which I personally do. My team does. I know many people do. Um, and so, yeah, designing some of the programs I have used with our managers, for example, I did a manager meetup with them on executive presence. That was the
Mhm.
topic
Okay.
I was teaching them on. And we talked about gravitas.
Mm.
So then I introduced a tool to them that they could use where they could practice going into a boardroom doing a presentation. And they could either be the person doing the presentation and do that whole simulation, and then they could switch and be a person in the boardroom that was asking questions. So that is one of those things where many of those tools of that nature are helpful because you could do that if you're in jet lag coming back from Taiwan and it's 2 in the morning.
Great.
You don't have to bother your executive coach, which would not want a phone call at 2 a.m.
Exactly.
Or maybe you're, on a, long drive or something, and you can call Bordy, which
Yep.
is something I
Yep.
have used quite a
Yep.
bit. He's on LinkedIn if you don't know him.
Mm.
So yeah.
Mm. Awesome. So, Laurie, any parting notes for talent development professionals out there? How to get started with technology? Obviously, they have a lot of apprehension when it comes to AI, and which is very natural, right? So, any parting notes, any parting advice that you have for them?
Yeah, I would just say something I say often in my company, whatever country I'm in, and we work from the APAC region all the way across the world to here on the West Coast of the United States. So anytime I'm on location in any of our global sites, I pretty much say the same thing, which is let's just be more human as leaders. The more human we are, the more human we allow ourselves to be, and give that psychological safety for our direct reports to be. And that means allowing them to have that safety to ask questions, to push
Yeah.
back. Our decisions aren't always 100% right. And that really has shown to be in Google's Project Aristotle the key to successful teams is that cultivation of psychological safety. And then I would say the other thing that another project Google did was called Project Oxygen, and they discovered that the best managers were coaches. And so being a coach means you're not solving the problems for your direct reports, but you are asking developmental questions, very thought-provoking
Right.
questions to help them find that new field of opportunity for them and help them have the confidence with
Yeah.
you assisting them and
Right.
coaching them to discover those things for themselves. And that is really leadership development,
Mm.
where you're not doing everything for them, but you're developing leaders, you're training the
Correct.
trainer, you're training
Right.
others
Right.
to lead. And that really does mean assisting, coaching, walking
Mm.
alongside. And isn't that how we grow as humans? So that's also what
Mm.
I mean by being more human. You're teaching your child to walk, you're not walking for them. You're cheering them on when they make a step and they fall down and they kind of learn and get bruises. But that's what it means to coach, to cheer and to support and to be there to help with the questions and be that safe person. So the more we do that, the more the future of work looks incredibly bright, partnering with AI for productivity, hopefully the parts that we don't love,
Yeah.
and doing more of that deep thinking that really
Correct.
as humans we bring
Correct.
to the
Correct.
table, and that
Right.
EQ and CQ that will position all of us for the future of work.
So, well, thank you so much, Laurie. It was a very, very fun conversation and very, very different perspective that you brought in today for our audience. So it was lovely having you with us today. And thank you so much.
Thank you. It was an honor and a pleasure.
All right, folks, there you have it. I'm sure you're going to have fun going through this episode of the Rise Up Radio. Until I see you next time, you folks be safe and take care. Bye bye.